This program is brought to you by Suffolk University. Please visit us on the web at www.suffolk.edu.
Lowell Institute, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and our partners at Suffolk University, which serves as the forum's home base. We also thank our members whose generosity make this a free public event that's possible for everyone to attend. If you're not already a member of the Ford Hall Forum, I invite you to visit our information table right out front that you passed on the way in. It's very easy to have a membership, and you always get to sit up front. Your support keeps the forum alive, independent, and, of course, free to the public. This event is being recorded, and it will be webcast on the WGBH Forum Network. If you're sharing a comment or a question, please speak directly into the microphone, as I am, although you will be speaking to that microphone right there. That's not only so that you'll be heard, but also so that we can capture you on video. If you do have a comment or question that you speak into the microphone, you are, in essence, giving the Ford Hall Forum permission to record you. And now I am delighted and honored tonight to introduce our moderator for the evening, Callie Crossley, a board member of the Ford Hall Forum. Callie Crossley is the host of The Callie Crossley Show on WGBH Radio 89.7 and a media commentator and public speaker. She is a regular panelist on the media criticism program Beat the Press, a regular contributor to Fox 25 TV's Morning Show, and frequently appears on the PBS NewsHour and CNN's Reliable Sources. Ms. Crossley is also a program manager for the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard University. Ms. Crossley has been awarded multiple journalism and film honors. She was a producer for ABC News 2020 and for, quote, Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Years, unquote, the acclaimed documentary series which earned her an Oscar nomination. Ms. Crossley has been a Nieman Fellow and an Institute of Politics Fellow at Harvard. She is a graduate of Wellesley College and holds honorary degrees from Pine Manor College and Cambridge College. Now, as I turn the microphone over to her, please help me welcome our moderator, Callie Crossley.
Good evening. Oh, that's too tepid. Good evening.
Good evening.
All right, I like a little energy. All right, good. I just want to let you know a little bit about our speakers tonight, and they are all very accomplished, and we're going to have some exciting things to say tonight. So, to my immediate left is Joseph Porcelli, founder of Neighbors for Neighbors Incorporated. Joseph Porcelli's personal mission is to connect, support, and inspire people, organizations, and governments to realize the difference they can make when they take action, work collaboratively, and leverage social platforms. He spends his time providing online and offline community activation strategy and management to organizations. Joseph is the Chief Executive Neighbor at NeighborsForNeighbors.org, a Boston-based 501c3 that operates neighborhood-centric, community-generated social networks powered by Ning. These networks serve as a soundboard for voices and springboard for action that connect people who live, work, and serve in the same neighborhood and provide tools for them to communicate and collaborate around their common interests. Joseph also serves as a guide on creators.ning.com, the Ning Network Creators Council, a mentor for Mayor Menino's 1 in 3 Council, and is a Boston World Partnership Connector. Joseph Porcelli. Let's go to Chris, who's right next to him. Chris Csikszentmihalyi, director of the MIT Center for Future Civic Media. Trained as an artist, Chris Csikszentmihalyi has worked in the intersection of new technologies, media, and the arts for 16 years, lecturing, showing new media work, and presenting installations on 5 continents and 1 subcontinent. Chris is a 2005 Rockefeller New Media Fellow and a 2007-8 Fellow at Harvard's Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. He taught at the University of California at San Diego, Rensselaer Polytech Institute, and at Turku University. Currently, he is the director of the MIT Center for Future Civic Media. Csikszentmihalyi Computing Culture Research Group is known for developing political technologies that rebalance power between citizens, corporations, and governments. Their efforts include the Afghan Explorer, a teleoperated robot journalist designed to bypass Pentagon and Taliban press censorship, and TextMob, a mobile phone-based activist system that enabled highly effective protests at the 2004 Republican and Democratic National Conventions. He is currently working on Extra Act, which will bring software-based tools for collective action to communities affected by oil and natural gas drilling. That's Chris. She sent me high. I had to think about it. Great name. And finally, Nigel Jacob, Senior Advisor for Emerging Technology for the City of Boston Mayor's Office. Nigel Jacob serves as the co-chair of the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, a new group within City Hall focused on delivering transformative services to Boston's residents. Nigel also serves as Mayor Menino's advisor on emerging technologies. In both of these roles, Nigel works to develop new models of innovation for cities in the 21st century. Nigel is a generalist and believes that lessons learned in one discipline can bring new insights to other disciplines. It is from this perspective that Nigel has worked for many years as a software engineer/architect and has made significant contributions to a wide variety of areas, including computational linguistics software, library informatics, computer security, and computer telephony. Oh boy, I'm making it through this. Prior to his work with the City of Boston, Nigel attended graduate school in computer science at Tufts University. That's Nigel Jacob. Now, each of our guests is going to give about a 5-minute presentation, after which I will ask them a few questions, and then we're going to invite your questions from the floor. So you can be thinking about what kinds of questions, not comments, that you would like to ask our guests after they speak. Now, do we want to do straws, or shall I pick?
Go ahead.
All right, Joe, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just telling some of my friends that I was going to come up with what I was going to say after they went. I guess not more. So I wanted to kind of start with sort of setting a tone about what we do and what's important and why we do the things we do. So before you look at the screen, I just want to ask you a couple questions about the summertime. Like, what do you like most about the summertime in the neighborhood where you live? What do you do with your neighbors? Somebody just shout some things out. Cookouts, great. What else? Sailing. Wait, one at a time. Go ahead, you. Sailing in Boston Harbor. What else? Go to the park. Go to the park. What else? I'm sorry? Little League. Nice. Great. What else? Outdoor movies. That sounds great, doesn't it? Like that good feeling that you have, the time when you spend with your neighbors and you're doing fun things together. And maybe if your neighbors need some help when you're doing that together to raise money for maybe someone whose house burned down or someone who's having some sort of medical issues that you need to rally around to help them. That's really what Neighbors for Neighbors is all about. So today we're going to talk about technology, but I'm really talking about using technology as a tool to communicate and collaborate so we can do things together in person that are fun and that are meaningful and that are impactful. So does that make sense and that sound okay to you? All right, cool. So now let's talk about what we do. So Neighbors for Neighbors here is we're billing ourselves as the online infrastructure, the online social infrastructure for neighborhoods that connect people online so they can do things together offline and for each other. And I started making that point, but I want to drill it home with you again. So there, in our neighborhoods now, lots of people have moved in, lots of people have left, some people speak different languages. But how do you connect with these folks? Not everybody's willing to wear a name tag like I do all the time, and it really helps me meet my neighbors. But what if there was a tool that you could go online to the internets, the interwebs, or as we call the internet here, and just using the common language, and find out who else is in your neighborhood, what their interests are, what they're up to, where they're going, and when they're meeting. That's what Neighbors for Neighbors does, and it's important, and we call it the word infrastructure because we really think that's necessary right now, where neighbors know each other by name, feel safe, have access to and share information and resources, and feel empowered and motivated to actively contribute to each other's quality of life. So that's what we're working towards. And that sounds pretty good too, right? Great.
Yep.
So if you can go to the next slide, please, Jen, or actually we're going to pull up Firefox. And go to, yep, there we go. So this is an example of what one of our networks looks like. This is the network for Jamaica Plain, which we started about 2 years ago, and that was part of the initial pilot, and Nigel was a huge part of helping us define what this looks like, but more importantly, how city employees like the Boston Police Department captain, community service officers, and the neighborhood coordinators from the mayor's offices would participate and contribute. So the first thing you'll notice here are members, and then to the right of that, there are blog posts. And we use blog posts as a way to communicate information with the entire neighborhood. So for example, you'll see First Thursdays is going on tonight. Just beneath that, there's a scam that's happening that the Boston Police Department posted to warn everybody of what was going on. Captain Grillian posted a firearm arrest. Often we hear about crime in our neighborhood, but what's happened? What's the follow-up? Well, in Jamaica Plain, and in particular here, the police department does a really good job of updating us on what's happened and what the progress is. If you'd scroll down a little bit, please, Jen. Beneath that, we have forum discussions, and this is where our neighbors find and share resources. For example, you can see there's a housing and office share. There is help wanted and seekers, and I guess those are the most popular ones right now, lost and found, and skill and tool share. So if you have a ladder that you're willing to lend, you can post that, and if you need a circle saw, you can also post that as well. Beneath, a little bit further down, please, Jen, you'll notice the community calendar. This isn't anything new, but you'll notice there's lots of value on the network. Information about the whole neighborhood, finding and sharing resources, things that are happening in the neighborhood. And then if you go down a little bit further, you'll see that there's photographs and videos, and I like to say that this allows our neighbors to express the diversity and beauty in their neighborhood as they see it. And Jen, if you'd scroll back up to the top, please. Now down just beneath where it says Facebook, a little further. On the right-hand side against, I guess the boundary, these are groups. And these are micro-communities that people organize around their interests and around their passions. And also businesses use them as fan groups, which allow them to sort of message out and tell people what's going on in the neighborhood. And Jen, if you'd be so kind, please, click on Hyde Jackson South Neighborhood on the right-hand side. Yep, there you go. This is a neighborhood zone group. And in our neighborhood zone groups, there's a couple of features you'll notice. And if you'll hold right there and scroll down just a little more, this happens to be the neighborhood where I live in. You can see a live crime map from the BPD database to see crimes that are reported in the neighborhood. And then just beneath that, you'll see there is a discussion forum that allows us to communicate with each other in a particular neighborhood to communicate about happenings such as crime, but also yard sales, potlucks, and so on and so forth. All right, and let's skip over to, skip that one. And let's go to YouTube here for a second. So another way that we use social media, and we use YouTube, and I wanted to make you laugh by showing you a very silly video I made, but the mayor's office rolled out single stream recycling. Have you seen the new blue cans that are all around the city and you can put everything in them? And so this is a video I made, and we blasted it out all over the city and into all our networks. And so this is an example of how you can use YouTube to promote something. So let's go ahead and watch this.
Hey everybody, it's Joseph from the Mug Project. I'm also your neighbor here in the city of Boston. But today I'm not here to talk about using mugs to reduce waste from disposable cups. I'm here to talk about this new recycling program here in the city of Boston. As you can see, I'm in this fantastic blue contraption, which is single stream recycling. What's really unique about this is that you can put all kinds of stuff in this blue bin, like bottles that you're used to. You've got newspapers right here, but you can also put, what's that? I'm making a video to promote the new recycling thing. Sorry, distraction. Anyway, so you also have like plastic things you can stick in here, and if I wasn't in the way, you could also put your old recycling. So no more having to swift through and sort your recycling. Shazam, it's the new thing. Use them, and look for the discussions on Neighbors for Neighbors so we can actually figure out how to make this work together.
Yeah, I'm not commenting. Thank you, Chris. So I wanted to sort of bring to light, like we talked about some serious things around crime, but you can actually have fun, make yourself look a little silly, but communicate something that's really important to you and educate people about new services that the city has. And that's one of the things we do as a part of our partnership. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on, and I promise that I talk about this, is what we're calling the aquapocalypse. Have you heard that word yet? Yeah. You know, like the water main broke and we had to boil our water. And on Twitter, we're calling it aquapocalypse. So this is a search on Twitter to see what people have been tweeting about. And a tweet is just a very simple, short communication. And it's tagged with things called aquapocalypse, boil water, and H2OMG, which means Watermageddon, I guess, or something like that. So there's sort of a fun, as you can see, spirit to how people are using some of these tools, but to communicate and educate and in some cases mobilize each other around things that are all important to us, but in partnership with government. So that's my brief presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. you, Joseph. Well, let's just go on down the line, Chris.
Okay, maybe I'll stand up there to give mine. There's a TV personality, a politician, and a community organizer. MIT people are not as people, so sorry if this is going to be more boring than any of the others. But I'm going to be talking about a variety of projects that are interfacing information technologies, social media, the power of networks, and government in one way or another. And I'm going to define it into 4 groups, essentially. And let me actually start my stopwatch. There we go. And those 4 groups are going to be between governments and citizens in different kinds of ways. So the first set of technologies that enable government somehow are government-to-government technologies, essentially. So these are things that CIA analysts use to figure out whether someone is checking into an airport, or that the IRS uses to figure out if you're consistently undercharging or things like that. And why is that an important issue? Because historically, these systems cost many, many times what they should. They're suboptimal. They're often 10 years late. So a lot of people have been working to kind of reform that process and start making demands of government that it, for instance, use open systems, things, the open source software that can be audited, that can be looked at by other people, where often the development is done without government having to pay for anything but the service contract. And finally, in such a way that the software is not locked into a single vendor through a particularly bad contracting process. So even though none of us see that software, and even though it affects us only tangentially, it's really important to us and something that we should make arguments for overall. The second set of technologies is technologies for government-citizen interaction in different kinds of ways. And this often has to do with what's called government transparency initiatives. So can you have software which basically interfaces often with that first set of software, where information about, say, congressional travel is not just gathered by the government to see if congressmen are breaking the laws and how badly, but rather becomes public as well, so that people can go through it and start looking to see, okay, who's paying money to my congressperson, who's doing what. And there's some really great organizations working on that. I'd mention ones like OpenSecrets.org, or the kind of the best one right now, the Sunlight Foundation, run by Ellen Miller, is doing pretty phenomenal work. And they're doing work on 2 levels. One, how do you get the government to agree to open data standards so that we can see what the government is doing, understand where the money is, follow it in different kinds of ways? But then also, how do you make that legible to everyday people? So Sunlight Foundations has, for instance, design competitions where you can basically walk through the street with your iPhone as if you're doing a navigation software, like on a GPS unit, and see what organizations are giving money to government by holding your phone up. And you literally see, dollar signs kind of flowing out of buildings and things like that. So some of it's playful, some of it's in the form of games, but there's a lot of ways that you can start building processes for both watchdogging and understanding, what the government is doing. Great for journalists, great for civic leaders, things like that. The third group that I'd mention is technologies that strengthen communities. And this is where Joe's work is really, really important. That in many cases, government is there as an extension of civil society, right? We tend to think of it as being this amorphous thing, but at the local level, government officials used to be your neighbor. They'll be your neighbor again come the next election if you have anything to do with it. It's sort of an open, flowing process between being a citizen, and being in government. And as you go up, it gets maybe a little bit more abstracted. But the point is that government comes in to do things that it doesn't make sense for companies to do, and that groups of citizens aren't likely to do. But there's always some gray area there. And so groups like Joe's are working with the police in Jamaica Plain and in other communities, helping the police do their job well, but then also helping the police understand the needs of citizens. So that kind of communication is great, and a lot of it has to do with really citizens taking over some of that role of organizing and activating. And that's also where the Civic Media Center that I run at MIT tends to engage in, is these things that strengthen communities of citizens, not necessarily of consumers or of special interest groups, but rather of citizens and civic groups. And the last group that I would say of these technologies, the fourth kind of category, is technology that doesn't help anyone. And so I'll just give an example of that. This is a project called Crime Reports. It's an iPhone app. And it looks a little bit like what Joe was saying, but there's a really big difference. This is just a map. It provides none of the context. It provides none of the communication with the police. It provides none of the communication with the neighbors. It's supposed to basically allow you to land in, my neighborhood, Somerville, and be able to walk, block to block safely. But in fact, I mean, someone asked I was at a presentation where one of the designers of the software was presenting, and they asked the designer, can you bring up Manhattan? And the designer brought up Manhattan, and they said, what about the white collar crime? The whole Wall Street area, there were no pins on it. Yet we've all had a significant amount of money taken from our pocket from that neighborhood. So, it's kind of a stupid application in that it misinforms people, doesn't give you a sense of the real risk, and moreover, if you're walking through a neighborhood with your iPhone, you're increasing the chance that you'll be robbed. So this is, the fourth category, but let me show some of the nice ones that do seem to be doing interesting stuff. This is SeeClick Fix. It's sort of like an open ticketing system for the equivalent of a 311 system or Mayor Menino's phone line, where people can basically report that there's a problem in their community. It puts it in a database. People from the city can go to it to look to see where there are open problems. If they say they've solved it, they will mark it as being solved, and a citizen can go then and verify and say, this is actually solved, I agree, this is a problem that's been solved. So SeeClick Fix. This is another one which is similar, called the Open 311 system, and this is an attempt to do this for any neighborhood, including small rural areas or cities internationally that are unlikely to be able to develop something like this on their own. So it's an open source initiative with lots and lots of contributors, essentially building an open 311 platform where people can report potholes and water issues and things like that. That's done by a nonprofit called Open Plans, or the Open Planning Project out of Manhattan. They've got a bunch of other projects. I would suggest going to their site and taking a look at some of what they're doing. This is some of our research at the Civic Media Center. The Mass Department of Transportation has been opening up some of their transportation data. This is happening in San Francisco. There are, for instance, iPhone apps where you can tell what time a bus is coming, so you know how long you have to get to the stop. But of course, not everyone has an iPhone, and a whole lot of people who have iPhones aren't taking the bus. So Rick Borovoy and a few other people are involved in essentially building small and expensive $100 LCD signs that can stay in your bagel shop or your corner store or your laundromat and basically say the bus is coming X number of minutes. The shop owner will be someone who buys it because it'll let people know that they have time for a purchase, pick up a pack of cigarettes, do whatever. And so the idea is to kind of create a public-private partnership using the data that MassDOT has been making public. We also are looking at a little bit of a higher level to try to understand how communities can inform themselves about their own situation and how they're doing. And this is an example of one called Red Ink, which has to do with how communities can understand whether people are buying locally, where money is leaving the community. And basically, it piggybacks on a bunch of systems like Expensify or Mint, which are software that basically let you keep track of your own finance. But the value proposition in that software done by corporations is that you will understand your own finances, so it's being sold to you individually. This is a system for communities or affinity groups or civic groups who basically want to understand their collective buying power. And so what it does is it allows everyone to basically allow their civic group to understand what's going on with some of their collective buying decisions. Oh, and it timed out. I'm not going to have time to log back in. But so I can basically say, there's a local, I want basically the city of Somerville to know what my purchases in Somerville come to and how much I'm purchasing outside of Somerville and what the areas that I'm purchasing outside of Somerville are. And Somerville can then use that information to see where money's leaving the community and offer that as a space for entrepreneurs to start doing development or seeing where people are bypassing local businesses to try to incentivize people to go to those businesses. And Nigel's working with another similar project that he'll probably talk about. And last, I'll talk about a great system which works more at the federal level. This is Little Sis, and you can see that, as they say, it's an involuntary Facebook for powerful Americans. And so this is really great for conspiracy theorists, but the data in it is actually quite good. And what it basically lets you do is look at an individual. I'll choose Robert Rubin because I was at his house for dinner once. And it basically shows who his closest friends and colleagues are, who his professional associates are, who's paying him money at any time in the past. And there's a tremendous number of interlocks, graphical applications that let you understand how these people are connected, where they're involved, when they're speaking at Congress, and things like that. So this is a great example. There's a local version of this happening in New York called Councilpedia, which is sort of a wiki that allows people to I don't want to say stalk, but figure out what their city council people are doing, 24 hours a day, and basically post it on to a website so that if a city councilman is talking in a particular place, or if you see them talking to a particular lobbyist, you can put all that information on. So it's sort of an alternative to local papers, which are increasingly going out of business, and to try to say, how can we organize the kind of collective to do this? So again, technologies for government, for itself, government-to-government technology is very important. We have a lot to say about that and should be involved. Technologies for government-city interactions, pretty growing area. There's a great conference called Gov 2.0 that covers that. Technologies to strengthen communities like Joe's work, and actually a lot of the stuff that Nigel and Urban Mechanics are doing, very, very important because it can take some of the weight off of government, but also help government so that government can amplify the services that they're providing. And then finally, technology that doesn't help, of which unfortunately there's a lot of examples I couldn't get to today, but we can talk afterwards. So thanks so much.
Nigel.
Thank you. So when I first saw my co-panelists, when I saw the list in the original email that I got, I was a little concerned that it would be a love fest because I agree so much. We're so good. There is that, but I was a little concerned that it would just be a lot of agreeing between the three of us, and it may yet become that. However, I wanted to see if I could position myself just a little bit in a slightly contrary position to push back, just a little. I don't know how this is going to work, so we'll see. So I've kind of thrown out all my notes, so I'm just going to try to wing it here. I would begin by saying that the challenges of government, there are kind of two. So when thinking about this question of whether or not can the likes of Twitter, YouTube, and other social networks help solve real government problems, it seems to me in order to be able to understand that question and unpack it, it really does depend on what you think the kind of problems that government has to solve are. On the first hand, if you think that government needs to solve problems of transparency and bureaucracy, you arrive at one way of thinking. However, when if your view on government is that we are supposed to tackle things like public safety, education, economic development, and the growth of jobs, I think that you think about this question in a very different way. So when I think about the challenges that have been brought about by social technologies, it's pretty clear that there's some really interesting trends. Now, people are expecting the ability, to be able to search for anything, to be able to find anything online. We're expecting to be able to share challenges or share experiences very easily with pretty much anyone that we want to, for the most part. We're also increasingly using our mobile phones or smartphones as interfaces to the real world. The challenge for a local government is to figure out, what do we do with all of that? We've developed an environment which is intended to deliver services in a very particular way. We build it once and deliver it forever in the same way. There's no consideration given to the services that government puts out there, to the notion of evolving the service, or how does the service innovate over time. So that's a big element. That's a big challenge. There are kind of two interesting lessons from the web, from the internet, that I kind of just wanted to briefly mention. There's this concept of peer production. Peer production is the idea that all the people that take part in a platform like YouTube are the ones that are actually producing all the content. I mean, YouTube on its own is useless, right? It's only when people start uploading videos that it gets useful. So that's called peer production or co-creation. So in that model, what begins to happen over time is that the sources of information, the quality of information the public are producing get better and better. So when we consider that one of the roles of government is to produce so-called canonical information, or to be a trusted source of information, how do we react to that? How do we react to the fact that there's way more content, in many cases better than what a government website has? What do we do with that? Do we start just copying and pasting from the web and saying there's other stuff out there as well, or do we stop providing services to people? So it's a challenge, is the long and short of it, that we're still trying to figure out. The second interesting practice from the internet is this concept of crowdsourcing, which is that you can take a problem and break it up into small pieces and get the crowd or the community to solve it. Now that's fine for certain kinds of problems where we're primarily talking about information or processing ideas or maybe even dealing with certain kinds of arguments. But that's only a small piece of the puzzle for government. We have to also, I mean, it's about roads, right? It's about physical infrastructure. It's about repairing lights. It's about making sure that that we catch the bad guys where crime is happening and so on. So is there a way to adapt or to use crowdsourcing to deal with those physical infrastructure issues, which at the end of the day, I would argue is the real reason that local government at any rate exists. So that was it.
Wow. Well, I guess since Nigel has really thrown down the gauntlet in terms of conversation, maybe I'll ask our other two panels to see if they can answer that question. What do you do in a situation where the technology and the consumers of technology have moved way ahead of where government is and where it may need to be to respond to its residents? And what's the best way for this new fifth estate to be effective in that way? Either one of you want to go first?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of my roles over the last couple of years that I played, I worked as a community organizer for the Boston Police Department and helped organize neighborhood watch groups across the city of Boston. And what I found, and one of the reasons that really motivated me to run with this idea with Neighbors for Neighbors, is there were great solutions in the neighborhoods, better solutions than the police department was working on. And I think what Nigel brought up is probably one of the most important points. But in so doing, it really challenges a couple notions, and I was just taking some notes here. First of all, I think it challenges our sense of authority and our sense of responsibility. Because what if we did have the answers to the problems? And what if it just took us being willing to take some action? And what if we did start taking action? Like, how did things get done? People did the work, right? And I think there are a lot of problems out there that could be solved. So let's take crime, for example. This is an easy one for me, but if you want to stop cars being broken into in the neighborhoods, stop leaving your stuff in your cars, right? Take your GPS unit down. Don't leave your wallet on your dashboard. You won't believe the stuff that happens, right? It's so simple. So we could take some responsibility and do some things, right? Now, that's a very simple problem, but there are other more complex issues out there. But I think that what Nigel's posing really does make lots of sense. And there's sort of this theme that's happening in Gov 2.0, and as Tim O'Reilly and the folks at O'Reilly and a lot of the conferences that we've attended have talked about, is that government, I think, is becoming more of a platform. So instead of having all the answers, they're saying, here's what we know, here's the data we have, what's your best solution? And that's starting to happen, and I think we're starting to see some breakthrough results with that. And I'll stop there and pass it off to Chris.
If I could just follow up on that before Chris says something, and you mentioned it in your presentation, Chris, and that was about the LCD clocks, if you will, put up in some spaces. That's a clear example of what Joe just said. You know, here is the city saying, all right, we're trying to figure out how to get information to people about what time these trains run, what time the buses come. And I actually interviewed the guy, one guy that came up with the one for J.P. Licks in Jamaica Plain. And, you know, he was just a guy, he said it took him an hour, okay? I mean, he was like, you know, once the city said, here's the information, somebody has a solution, go ahead and do it. Then he went home and went, do-do-do-do-do-do, and now it's up in J.P. Licks. So that sounds pretty good to me. Is that where you were going to go in addressing this?
Yeah, almost. I mean, you know, I do think that, I mean, I think, Nigel, the one thing I would say is that I think, you know, if you look at, say, the past presidential administration in the United States, they had a very different relationship to this than the current administration. And I think that the current administration is offering a much clearer idea of how to do this. So, you know, one of the things that they've done is they've brought in experts from the technical community into the administration. So the State Department has experts in social networking and internet freedom, and they're using this as kind of an export diplomacy method. And they're doing data.gov, which is the kind of largest data dump, as we say, that the federal government has ever done. And the flip side of transparency is glare, as someone once said. It's they can be related, but they're being very aggressive about this and treating this more as a lab. And it really came home to me when I was at one of these conferences, and there, it was basically a bunch of people like Yahoo and Google and different Web 2.0 kind of startups. And there was a guy from the White House from the CTO's office who was basically saying to people, okay, so what do you guys need? And people would say real-time bus data, and he was like, okay. And then other people were looking around, and they were like, huh. And they said, how about data from the FDA? And he was like, okay. And finally, after like half an hour of this, someone said real-time flight data, and he was like, and you saw why, but for 20 or 29 of the things that people asked for, he was like, okay, we can do that. If you can make something out of it that's useful, we'll give that up to you. So I think that's a big issue. And MassDOT, love them. There was pressure from some other cities to do this, and the guys came to us and they said, we need something to prove, that this is potentially useful. And so we started working on a bunch of things. We had some brainstorming sessions at MIT. So I think part of it is to say, how can government get out of this model of saying provide it forever for things where it doesn't matter. Now, a water main, I'm glad that our water mains from 100 years ago when people were willing to invest in them are still going. So don't get me wrong, I like things that last a long time. But I also feel as if there's a bunch of things, a lot of them, in the space of information, like the fact that Boston has so few street signs, that could, if you said, okay, the old way isn't working, let's try something quicker, then maybe that would free things up. So I do think that government needs to work to understand that some things are processes and some things should last 100 years, and to try to start to pull those out and say, okay, we shouldn't give flight information in real time, but this would work. So but I think the last thing I'd say, one place where you're right, roads can't be fixed by software. But we're working, for instance, in about 20 states in the rural United States where natural gas extraction is a big issue. Like, what's happening in the Gulf right now is happening in a distributed way around the country all the time. And for instance, in Colorado, there's 80,000 wells on private property. And there's, I think, 7 state inspectors who are supposed to cover those 80,000 wells. And there's no way that can happen. But what's happening right now is the inspectors are just doing a bad job. But if you start to look at some of the 311 and other systems like that, you can start to have people, say, doing triage themselves. Community groups can start saying, okay, this is an issue, so that it makes the job of those inspectors easier and they can figure out what's the most important thing to go to. So, roads, great that the city's building it, but I think some of the question about figuring out where there are potholes, better the citizens do that than to have someone going around. I saw a guy not too long ago in Cambridge who was touching everything metal on the street because of those electrocutions that were happening. Yep. I was thinking, I'm glad someone's doing that job, but what a weird job. This guy just going and touching every manhole with a fluorescent light essentially that would turn on when the manhole was electrified. And that's a critical, deadly issue, but there's a lot of ones like that I think can be devolved to the people for whom it matters the most.
Joe, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to touch base again on the idea of platform, and Neighbors for Neighbors is a platform. It's not a solution. And the reason that we built it that way is that, all these people had all these ideas, but I was the bottleneck. Everything had to go through me. People had to communicate through me, and I was staying up too late. I didn't have a life. But essentially what we did is we created this platform that allows people to self-organize around their own vision whenever they wanted. And it allowed other people to communicate directly with them without us having to be in the way. So I think sort of the theme that we're talking about in terms of putting this in English and something that you can understand with all this is that I think the concept of platform really is going to make a big difference. And it will solve the problems of capacity and solve the problems of bottlenecks, which I think will inherently help deliver the critical services of testing the what are they called? What are you called in the street? Help me out here. The electrified.
Manhole?
Oh,
A manhole, thank you.
Oh, yeah,
So-
right.
Stray voltage was the problem.
stray voltage.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Sounds like a euphemism.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Can I?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty deep into the whole Gov 2.0 community myself. And I've been watching it as that conversation unfolds. And what I've found is that you've basically got two things going on, right? You've got technologists talking to technologists, and you've got technologists talking to government. And you have no communication with the public, right? So there's a whole when we think.
And why is that?
Because technologists want to work on. So I don't agree with a lot of what I'm saying, but I'm going to say it because it's fun. You know, technologists generally want to work on the stuff that they like to work on, and the things that are that they would like to see solved. But there's no. I mean, it's totally unclear as to whether or not those sets of problems overlap at all with what the public, like you know, solutions to public good challenges. So what we're having is we're seeing so from our vantage point in local government, we're seeing these Gov 2.0 conferences and online discussions, you know, often many of them associated with O'Reilly, who's fabulous, by the way. And we also see these conversations going on in the community around what we need, what are the challenges, how do we organize around those kinds of things, and that's fabulous as well. But we're not seeing that cross-pollination between need and opportunity. And so that's a challenge. So the apps that we're seeing come out of the OpenGov initiatives, I would say, aren't connecting very much with some of the on-the-ground challenges of communities. How do I deal with, supposing I'm a recent immigrant to the United States, like in Boston, so this is a real problem. I can't read the signs, you know, because I speak Vietnamese as my first language. So what does having newer apps of any sort do for me? It really does nothing. So there are very basic problems that the dots aren't getting connected on.
Let me ask this question. I see that Chris wants to jump in, but so is this a situation because, you know, I believe the old 60s bumper, you know, when the people lead, the leaders will follow. So if there's enough pressure from people down here saying, this is what I need, and I don't care that you're working on the latest new door opener, it's not interesting me, does not then those technologists who are focused on get interested in these solutions? I mean, don't they see that's where everybody is going and we're not paying attention to your latest toy because we're over here? Does that not happen? Yeah, I'm just wondering. You know.
So it might happen in a limited context in certain examples, but for the most part, it doesn't really happen because we're talking about. So the developer community has been talking about technology for many years, and so there's a lot of online forums, for example, a lot of conferences in which those conversations happen and are extended, and is great stuff, right? I mean, you can look at like the open source movement and Linux, that all comes out of those kinds of deliberations. But those are very rarefied discussions in a certain sense relative to the on-the-ground need of jobs and safer communities and economic development, those kinds of things. So there aren't really good forums, you know, to intersect that level of need with the kind of opportunity that's out there.
Go ahead, Chris.
I guess I would just say that, yeah, I completely agree, although, you know, obviously Joe's work is you know, doesn't resemble that problem at all, and I think that we saw that as a problem when we started our center, and so there's a requirement. We do extensive field work. We work a lot with communities, and most of what we comes out of those community needs and challenges. And, you know, you gave an example of translation and first languages. One of my grad students years ago did a project called Speakeasy, which came out of a really funny kind of bus ride that he had, where he was on the Chinatown bus, you know, these buses that go to DC and New York that are really cheap and often catch fire. And he was behind a woman who was speaking very vigorously in Cantonese on a phone, and then she was speaking English into a different phone. And she was going back and forth between these two phones. And when they stopped at the Roy Rogers for the bathroom break, he said, what was that? And she said, oh, I was translating between my grandmother and her landlord. And he said, how often do you do that? And she said, I've got two phones. And, you know, and he asked her, do you want to do that? And she said, well, you know, some of the time, but a lot of the time I don't. I'm on a date, or, you know, I'm having to translate between my grandmother and her doctor, and no child should have to do that, you know. And so he said, okay, well, what's one of the things about immigrant communities like the Chinese American community? They help each other, right? There's this incredible social networking and kind of mutual help that happens because of need. But it becomes the strength of the community. So he developed a system that allowed grandkids, or second or third generation immigrants who are bilingual to volunteer not all the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for their grandmother, but rather like 5 or 6 hours a week for everyone's grandmother. And they were staggered a couple thick, and they would just basically answer the call and then be able to initiate a three-way conversation. He initially wanted to call the project Three-Way, but we decided it should be called Speakeasy.
Good call.
And that was pioneered with AC/DC in Chinatown here, as you know, and it's a project which they're continuing to try to develop. So it is possible, I think, through a process of kind of ethnography, working with the community. There's a variety of ways that you actually can make it happen. But I completely agree. Most of the dialogue is happening in a rarefied way.
What I'm taking from Nigel is that the will is not there. It's not only that there is the rarefied conversation. They're enjoying it. They don't care that you have a pothole.
Yeah.
So, and to me, that's where crowdsourcing, and by the way, the guy who concretized that concept is a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. Just want to say that, Jeff Howe. But where crowdsourcing, it sort of brings that together, because there's some pieces of information out there and people say, I don't like how you did it. So now I'm going to show you what we think it works for us and what is interesting to me. I just can't figure out why that's not working more across the board, because anybody who's trying to make a buck in this country understands they better pay attention to where because people will mash up for their own needs and purposes.
So I think that we've actually entered over the last 5 years into new territory. This concept of civic technology, and I think, so frankly, I think that there are signs that we can be hopeful for as far as intersecting need with opportunity, as far as the technology and the community is concerned. I just lost my point. I just
Don't
lost
you
my
hate
train
that?
of thought.
You hate that? You want me to sing?
Yeah, I was
They
trying to
come
think of
back
two
to
different things.
A Brave New World.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Thank you. And I think that when we look at other sectors that are more mature, what we see is, so I was talking to a guy from Microsoft, and he was talking about their shift to some more recent technologies, to like what's called cloud technology,
Yes.
where it's not all on servers that you own anymore, but it's kind of out there over the web. And
Of course, they can read your stuff. That's just saying
Yeah.
conspiracy theorist
Yes,
that I
very
am.
good.
But, you know.
But what he was saying is that by using what's called software as a service, right? So you no longer have to sort of download the software and run it on your computer. You can run it from the internet, essentially. They're able to embed tools within their software as a service so that they can get feedback from their users immediately. So they no longer, so in the case of Microsoft, they no longer have to wait, or the public, or neither of us really have to wait for these long product cycles to get the feedback and to pull it back into how they're thinking about their products. It's a constant process. I mean, it's a moving target for them, but that as an approach, I mean, and Google, Amazon, that's what makes their site so interesting, is because they do evolve very quickly, because it is software as a service. The challenge has been that in the civic space, so in the civic technology space is basically trying to use cutting edge technology to address public good, right, in the most general sense. So it could be software, it could be physical hardware as well. I think that a lot of those tools and approaches, like having the automatic feedback built into the tools, just hasn't been there up until very, very recently. So my feeling is that we're going to see some improvement over time. I think that as more cities start using tools that allow, for their websites or whatever, to more easily gather that feedback right away, then they will very quickly. So I mean, local government works like Microsoft did, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, where it was slow-moving, ponderous, because there's a very long process between which we roll something out and for it to improve, right, through the natural course of just working with it. But I think the same sort of things that will happen in the civic technology space, that we'll begin to see these sort of rapid iterations happening, and you'll see, projects that
I
address
think,
scale.
governments aside, for citizens, it's really
Right.
important for them to see quick feedback too. And, that's again one of the things I really love about Joe's work, is that like there was a fire in your community and you did fundraising immediately, the same day to try to get people to provide stuff for the family that was displaced. And then you sent follow-ups and you said, this is how it worked out. And so people could see, there was a direct effect of
You
this
get
action.
trust. I mean, I think that's one thing we
Exactly,
haven't
yeah,
talked
yeah.
about is, do people trust government, right? Do we trust that these things are going to happen? And I think that one of the things that we are doing well, to toot our own horn for a second, is you get that feedback, right? You see the captain saying, there was a shooting, we made an arrest. There was a fire, we raised money, here's how much money we raised, here are the people we help. So those cycles, Nigel, you're absolutely right, have really gotten much shorter, and our ability to communicate is much quicker. I mean, another example, back in September, there were 5 assaults, 3 at gunpoint, within 3 hours in my neighborhood. The next day, we had 6,000 flyers distributed by 50 volunteers, and if you walked home on the street where those muggings happened, you would be accosted by neighbors saying, hey neighbor, I got your back. And that's like a very powerful experience, but it's because this technology is in place and we can mobilize the stakeholders who are the people who live in the neighborhoods, and because we have the partnerships where we can turn something around very, very quickly. And there's actually a very satisfying quote. One of the victims said, I was gonna leave the neighborhood, but my neighbors made me feel safe again and I stayed. That's valuable.
Okay, so let me ask a couple of, broader questions, if I will. One is, how do you make sure that everybody is in the circle? Okay, because this is great if you're all in it and you know what's happening and you can communicate with your neighbors and you know it, but, lots of folks find anything related to technology actually off-putting.
Right.
And then there are some people who are just not engaged at any level. So how do, if this is the way it's going and that's the way it's going, how do we make sure that everybody's in the tent?
Well, I mean, from a certain perspective, that's always been a challenge, right? There have always been segments of the population that are not connected to anybody, right? So it's not as though, I wouldn't even say that technology exacerbates the problem to a certain degree, because the same people that weren't connected before are still not connected, and they're whether it be the shut-ins, the elderly, sort of linguistically isolated communities, and so on. So I think that technology sort of shines a light on that problem, but certainly doesn't make it worse, I would say. Admittedly, there are a lot of people that don't want to use technology, but when you consider something like a 311 system, right, like an open 311, there's a phone line, right? You don't have to be using smartphones and whatnot. So I think that the lesson is that it's not a problem of technology. I think this is more about our society and the disconnectedness of it already. I mean, I'm thinking of Bowling Alone,
Yeah,
those
Robert
kinds
Putnam.
of, right, those kinds of observations is a fact of modern life, and that we as a culture need to solve. And how do we do outreach? And so I think that Joseph's work is totally on point for tackling some of those issues. So I think that, what does the solution look like? I think the solution basically looks like more community engagement from the people that are in the know, reaching out to their neighbors, especially those that are isolated. It's this multi-channeled approach. We can't think that it's all going to happen because of SMS or websites or even phone trees or mass mailings. I think you have to do all those things plus other stuff.
Did you?
One of the things we do is, and I think one of the reasons we grew as quickly as we did and as powerful as we do, is we pass out tons of flyers. Like if you live in JP, you've seen me at the T-stop, and I'm going to shake you out. I'm like, welcome home, here's a flyer, boom. And I'm going to hit you with a flyer. And it's in English and Spanish, right? And we have block captains organized on our networks. So like when we were all going to die of H1N1, we organized all these block captains, worked with the Mayor CERT program, and people were saying, I'm willing to go to my neighbors, knock on their doors, and say, hey, this is what's up, here's what you need to do. So we take into account sort of the offline communication that needs to happen. And I think, like Nigel said, I think this is a problem we've always had. We're trying to figure out how we can use this technology that we're communicating with online in between when we're meeting in person to reach people that typically haven't been reached. And another something that we haven't talked about too much yet is text and mobile communication. There's a gentleman by the name of Joe Edelman who's created something called groundcrew.us that allows, so let's say something's happening right now, 10 of you volunteer, say I will do these things. I have this little dashboard and I can send text to you to say, okay, here's what you have to do to help. And other people can text and say, yeah, I want to help too. So there's lots of technologies out there that don't have to go on the internet. That can just be from your regular mobile phone if you send a text. So those things are coming up, and they can be incredibly powerful. I'll give you an example. So we had 20 feet of rain in March. Do you remember that? All the rain we had? So Boston Cares got notice from the state, and they put a call out for volunteers to help sandbag. And I'm like, oh, I'd totally do that. I like to, shovel stuff, use my muscles and everything. And I called the line, and it was busy. I called it 10 times, and I couldn't get through. But if they had Joe's information, you could text in and say, yes, I want to help sandbag. I'll get another text back that says, okay, Joseph, can you please go to this place? And maybe I'll get there, and they had enough volunteers to say, Joseph, we have another. Can you go here? Imagine how many more bags would have been, how many more bags would have been distributed in such a less time. And imagine the user experience of the people who want to help would have had a better and more satisfying experience who would help again.
And where were you when they were trying to get those rebates for the appliances? Hello?
Yeah, I got mine already. I wasn't worried about anybody else.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
All right. Well, thanks very much for those very provocative comments. That's just the opening. Now it's your turn to ask questions that you are burning to ask these very knowledgeable panelists. Please go to the microphone and identify yourselves. And I'm asking for questions, not comments. Questions. Come on. I know you have some. There you go.
All right.
A lot of neat ideas, but I'm wondering how it's financed. Each of you come from 3 different backgrounds, 3 different types of organizations. Could each of you kind of talk about where the money's coming from to support this? Because I sure would like to see it go forward.
Great. I'll start.
Go for it.
So we have no funding.
There you go.
Yeah, so Ning is a very inexpensive platform, and actually there are people all over the world starting to do neighborhood models. There's W14 in London, there's Oak Park in Chicago, and now there's Hub City Living in Compton, California. And it costs about $20 a month to run one of these networks. And we've been trying to get funding, but quite frankly, it's been challenging because funders in this economy are looking for impacts based on programs, not on platforms. So 3 years from now, they'll be funding it. And fortunately, the technology doesn't cost that too much time, and I'm just really willing to work really hard for the time being. But you can make a donation to Neighbors for Neighbors, and I'll see you outside. Thank you, sir.
Go on your website and you can find a place to.
Yep, my cards are right out front. Donations of $50,000 and greater are greatly encouraged. Thank you.
From my perspective, so funding is a huge challenge. There's no doubt about that. And I think that we need to get creative about how we think about funding these projects. So for a local government, the challenge has been our ability to fund things and to put together funding packages is highly constrained by state legislation. Right? We have to go through an RFP process, and we have to do these sorts of things, which both slows down the process to a standstill, so that we can't. It's so slow that if we wanted to do something, for example, and fund Neighbors for Neighbors, we could do it in like 10 years or something. You know what I mean? It's just very slow. So instead, we're taking the perspective that what if we thought differently about the way these projects run, rather than thinking about it as a project that'll run for a year or two, it'll cost $1 million, and will likely lose funding somewhere in between and kind of die a horrible death. Instead, we should think about funding smaller scale projects or pilots, say on the order of $20,000, that will have it'll be smaller, both in terms of impact, but because it won't have to go to RFP, that we can fund more of them over time and actually think about them as experiments to explore different opportunity or different possibilities in the problem space. One of the things, the traditional challenges with the way government thinks about problems is if there's a problem that's been addressed, we'll design a very big solution for it, and we'll slowly guide it towards the solution, and that's fraught with peril. So instead, we want to kind of crowdsource it, right? So we want to break this thing into 100 pieces and find, sow a garden of possible solutions and let them have at the challenge. And in doing so, hopefully at least one of them will solve the issue. And they'll do it far more quickly and more cheaply.
I guess I'd add, you know, I think both of those are great examples. And I mean, Joe, I don't know what makes him tick. He's a superhero of some sort. But many of these projects, I mean, they're really not like the Big Dig. You know, I mean, they are like Ning. They're incredibly cheap to run once they're going. So the real issue is the research and development and how that goes, and is the research and development, as you say, getting real feedback. That fieldwork process and working with communities can be pretty expensive compared to just developing software. But you know, we're just talking, it's really not that big a deal. So the question then, though, is how is it run? How is it introduced to communities? How do communities co-maintain it? But we have a great model, which is something that, you know, Nigel was talking about as well, which is this model of free software and open source, which has been incredibly effective in the last 10 or 15 years. An example is the Linux operating system or the Apache web server. These are systems that are trouncing Microsoft, and the foundations that run them have a savings of, you know, $500 at the end of the year and yearly expenses of like $50,000 or $60,000. So how does this incredibly complicated technology get developed? It turns out that lots of people have created businesses that are making money through this, you know, and so it's not a one-to-one match of a piece of software and an enterprise that runs that software. And so we really look to that as a great model, because what you can start to do is to say, this can create things for which there's no one market for, or, you know, one company that needs to make money to do it, but rather a bunch of interested, concerned citizens around the world can collaborate on Open 311, and with some seed funding, essentially they will volunteer their time because it's an issue that's important to them, and then they'll collaboratively maintain it as well. And that, it sounds like magic, it's actually not, but it's an incredibly effectual system that's just trouncing a lot of private, huge corporate initiatives. And so we really see that as a way of doing software and technology in the public good, you know, with a very different funding model than we would have expected prior. And a great example of that, I mean, the US government used to subcontract this stuff out, you know, we would, as taxpayers, would be reamed. It would be terrible. And moreover, what would almost always happen at the federal level when, you know, some contractor comes in and says, we'll serve your data to the public, which by law has to be public, we will do it as a value added, and so we'll end up charging people. And, you know, there are these databases like federal court records where every search you do costs a couple bucks. You know, but this is by law supposed to be public, but it costs a couple bucks. And so some guys at Harvard started a system where basically they developed a Firefox plugin that caches the information anytime a lawyer does a search, and then puts it up on a public database, because it literally costs nothing at this point to host. So they're basically scraping this system that's charging, and they've got 70% of this for hire system is now being served on a free public database. So people are doing it even without permission. You know, and so I think that, you know, I don't want to come off like a libertarian. You know, I'm really into government, but, you know, unfortunately the government is an easy mark for a lot of technology developers. And we think that there's some really great labor models out there which offer a different approach.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Come to the microphone. I see a hand in the back. Please come and identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Marie Eisenberg, and my question will, I've selected out of many. Doesn't Ning collect data and then therefore owns the data that you're processing when you allow them to host? That hosting is happening somewhere and the data doesn't belong to you anymore, just like the people who pay for the searches are actually the ones who are getting reflected in other databases. So isn't this just another way of like sending all our data off to someone that we don't even know who it is and can account for?
Sure. I haven't looked at the latest privacy policy on Ning. I know about a year and a half ago there were some questions about that. And when I remember when I looked at it, I wasn't concerned. But they did just announce that you can export all of your data out of your Ning network if you want to go somewhere else. So I think that'll solve that.
And what's the impetus for that?
The impetus for that is Ning is no longer allowing or offering free networks. So because they will start charging, they've changed their business model, and this is something I actually advocated for, is that you will be able to export all your data.
Thank you.
You need to be worried about Google Buzz. They're evil.
Yeah, I know.
So I mean, I think
This way, I agree.
Okay.
you know, it's a great question, and one of the things that we're really interested in is developing software where communities keep their data. So we've got a student named Jeff Warren who actually flew down yesterday to the Gulf, and he's working on a project called grassrootsmapping.org, which is related to Google. That right now, if a community wants to, for instance, create a special map, a Google map where they put up community information, Google then owns that information. And so Jeff Warren has basically been working on a set of mapping technologies called grassroots mapping, which allow communities to map themselves but retain all the data information that they use in the process. And again, that's possible now. It costs him a couple $100s a year to keep that system running, but communities get to walk away with the data for themselves. So.
I think it's important.
I'm Ed McGowan. I was wondering, how do politicians feel about these systems building up, like Mr. Rubin and so on, and all his buddies?
I'll let you comment on the little system.
Well, yeah, so Mr. Rubin and his buddies are no comment, is what they usually say. We did a system called Open Government Information Awareness, which was our kind of response to the government's Total Information Awareness system, a system that they were running. Former Admiral Poindexter, the only felon out of Iran-Contra, became a defense contractor and then ended up working on this gigantic government initiative called Total Information Awareness, where they were basically spying on everyone all the time. And so we came up with the proposition, well, who could change that? And the answer was the Senate. So we figured if the government can spy on us all the time without our permission, we should be able to spy on our governors without their permission, knowing that one time Jimmy Carter had the nuclear codes in his dry cleaning. So basically as a way for any cab driver, pharmacist, prostitute to put up information about government officials. And we ended up taking it down because we actually don't like that world. We don't like that future, either where the government is spying on us or where we're spying on the government. So when the Senate ended Total Information Awareness as a project, we took down our project. But we got a lot of feedback from politicians, and it was not too pleasant. But we could always come back and say, well, we have evidence of your infidelity. So it was sort of a little bit of an arms race.
I got a new network for you. Let's do old boyfriend network. Let's do that. I want to see that with all those associations. Next. Oh, yes, sir. Please, up to the mic.
My name is Arthur Obermeyer, and I think that especially the government is just very slow in adapting to new technology. Technology is way ahead of what really can be done. And some very simple things need to be done. First, in terms of available feedback, and second, a question I think everybody else can relate to. Just in the past week, we had a water main break, which meant almost no one here was able to have use water for drinking for a couple of days. Now I found out about it when a friend sent me an email and said, "Don't drink the water."
What time was that, and what day?
That was when was it? Monday, Saturday.
Saturday.
It was Saturday, and it was about 3 hours after it happened.
Great.
And but what I should have done is gotten an email from my city saying, "Don't drink the water." They don't have the capability to do that, and I don't know if anybody lives anywhere where they did get an immediate email. Well, that's good.
So there were actually phone calls and emails, and Twitter actually all went out.
I eventually got email from
What city? Do you live in Boston?
Newton,
In Newton?
from my state rep.
Well, we can't.
That was about
Yeah.
that was about 8 hours later.
Yeah.
But the
So
friend
the-
is
So you're actually hitting. Pardon me?
In Boston, was that for seniors or everybody?
It was everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah. The challenge that you're talking about there is making sure that we have sufficient coverage over our population, which is in fact a big problem because right now, how would your average citizen know to go to cityofboston.gov and sign up for different alerts? I mean, if you're there for some other task, you might think to look for that sort of thing.
that's the reverse of what's needed because people don't. You have to reach them rather than have they reach you.
Agreed.
You
Right,
can't expect.
Right.
You can't expect somebody to have the intuition to know that a water main broke.
But at the same time, part of it is there's a question here about, we could do blast numbers and blast emails and try to scrape, to find everybody in the city of Boston, but this is getting onto touchy ground. I mean, if we're talking
Privacy
about
issues.
civil liberties
Yeah.
and privacy issues.
Yes, but when a water main breaks, that's not really a spam. You have to be
I-
very, very careful about how you
I
use
think
it.
there's probably a lot of people that would disagree with you as far as
Because the
that-
question is, what would they use the database for?
Exactly.
In another situation. So there are a lot of people who wouldn't want that. I'm surprised that no one had big trucks of food coloring. Because I mean, if I turned on the tap and the water was bright green,
Yeah.
I would have started looking for information. But
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's a good idea, actually.
You got to go up
Yes,
to the
ma'am.
microphone.
Please go to the mic, yeah.
Hi, my name is Deborah Finn, and I'm Facebook buddies with at least two of you. So anyway, I want some advice. Not you, Chris. Sorry. You can be if you want to. Okay, so I want some advice from the Fifth Estate here. I work on a project which Joseph knows all about. It's called Ask Your Lawmaker, and so we have this online tool, and anybody in the world can go online and ask a question of any U.S. senator or congressperson, and then these aggressive journalists run over and stick a digital audio microphone under the nose of them as they're coming out of the senatorial washroom or whatever, and get an answer and post it on the web. And it is like pulling teeth to get real people to do it, to go to the website and post their question about any topic at any time of the day or night to any senator or representative. I work pretty hard trying to engage with concerned citizens and advocacy groups. So I want some advice from the Fifth Estate about how to pique interest and actual engagement at that level. I'll take my answer offline.
My question would be just from a media perspective, if the questions are narrow enough. In that sense, they have to be, I think the more you have specificity and narrowness, you can get to people. So if it's like, are you mad about the water main break? But if it's like, on your street, did you know that you got 30 more gallons of bad water than the people over on the next street? Okay, now you got my attention. What are you talking about? You know, where was my guy? Was he in the Caribbean? Right. You know, when I needed to figure out what was going on.
So are you asking me if
I'm suggesting you said you wanted advice. So I'm saying if you narrow the questions that you are asked, that you, in framing the issue, to encourage
we
people
don't
to
frame the
respond.
issues. We tell people, ask whatever you want.
So I think that's the
that's the
problem.
problem.
That's the problem.
We ask them to be as specific as possible.
I know, but people can't do that.
You
Yeah.
almost have to- so one of the
Okay,
things.
so the whole model's wrong. We should all go home. Okay.
No, I think your model's great then.
Okay.
And I really like what you've built there.
Okay.
I think it's finding people when they have a problem or a need and suggesting this as a solution at the point of pain.
Yeah. I would agree. I think that, campaigns, not political campaigns, but like public awareness campaigns, they're targeted, they're focused, and they get a lot of people engaged because they use different techniques than just, and ask us whatever it is that you want to ask. I think that this is the challenge, actually. Some of the subtle challenges with respect to running a democracy are not all questions are always relevant, and not everyone cares all the time. So things, which is why we see certain things are hot topics at different times when they're kind of emblazoned all over the media and so on. So it is, it's a question of, at some level, filtering, right? I mean, by using certain kinds of questions or certain kind of context, it filters in people's brains, so they can contribute certain kinds of content or ask certain kinds of questions. But I think that, Joseph is right.
I think focusing on events or specific needs, but also I think you want to look at so I don't know if you're aware of Public Insight Journalism. It's a project out of Minnesota Public Radio. And they basically have a network now of 70,000 people that they use to field questions for stories. So sometimes they're looking for feedback. So like during the financial crisis, they were like, okay, we have 250 bankers in our community. Let's start asking them what we should be looking at. But then people will also send them emails and say, this is kind of an interesting thing that's happening with NASA. Physicists will write to them. So of 70,000 people, there's this really nice kind of cross-section of the community. But at any one time, most of those people aren't engaged. But at any one time, 20 of those people are engaged. And so I think as you build your network, you're going to find that it really helps. And I guess the last point is that people's professional identification or their area of interest or their area of specialty is a big deal, and so, our kind of notion of the citizen, this kind of amorphous unit, is actually not a particularly active, entity. But, when we're working, we end up, finding that doctors will engage with something particularly, or lawyers will engage with something particular. And the same, when it comes to like Josh Micah Marshall and Talking Point Memo with his crowdsourcing, he puts out these documents, and they're not for everyone. In the end of his community, a few people will engage with a particular document because they have expertise in that area. So I think, as you grow your network, you're going to find that you'll find that engagement on particular issues at particular times. But the way to grow that network is to approach those people at a time when they're in trouble, and then bring them in, and then they'll come back to you later again.
Not to be self-serving, but if you take a page from talk radio, I will tell you, if I say, we're talking about this, give us a call, almost nothing. If I say, we're talking about this, and I know that you want to know about if your house is on fire, to whom should you, will the fireman who just got $19 million respond to you? Then it makes a difference in how it is phrased. And I'll just give you and then I was listening to Dan Ray on BZ going home one night, the night after there was a vote on Rick Perry's bill. And it was voted down very narrowly. And he just literally took the sheet and said, do you want to know what your representative, how he voted? Call in. So somebody say, I'm from Somerville. How did so-and-so vote? And he said, well, he said no. Oh, no. And they said, well, what about so-and-so? He said yes. Okay. And so on and on and on. That was the entire show. And people were all up in arms and very interested. Even for people who weren't up in arms, they were interested in how other people voted. So I would say narrow and define and frame.
And I know you like to test things, Deb, so I might suggest searching some hashtags like fail, gov, mass on Twitter or wherever it is, and then DM or send a direct message to those people on Twitter and say, like, hey, you want to make some noise?
Yeah, actually, our guest this afternoon in our interactive Ask Your Lawmaker podcast, we also have a podcast in addition to letting people go online, is Dennis Kucinich. So I was looking for people who were reaming him out on Twitter and saying, sending them messages saying, would you like to ask him a specific question?
How'd that go?
Click here. We'd like to have the answer. We'd like to
get answers.
Did you get any answers?
Yeah.
Nobody responded.
Huh.
None of those tweeters responded. No, I'm not saying that nobody had questions for Representative Kucinich, because we did have a good, healthy number of them.
Right.
The podcast gets a slightly different, because there's a specific deadline. We're interviewing him at 5 p.m.
Right.
Get your questions by this moment is a lot different than
Right.
anytime, 24/7, any senator or House member, and so on. So that it does have so maybe having a deadline is something that we should have more of in the whole program.
Keep us posted.
Anyway, I'm taking up enough time. Thank you.
Keep us posted.
Okay. Next question. Please come to the microphone. I see a hand all the way in the back. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Hi. You talk about building communities online in order to augment real-life communities, but how do we ensure that social media doesn't end up replacing a real-life community?
I say that's up to us, right? It's easy. I was talking to someone on the subway on the way here today, and they're saying, yeah, everybody's on their iPhones watching movies here and there, and there was actually a woman here earlier saying that people are watching movies on their little iPhones, and they're always focused on their screens. You just got to look up and start talking, and that's something that we need to choose and live as value every day. That's my answer.
Have you seen that commercial that I love where there's two guys on a plane and he says, hey, I want to talk to you about the stockholders meeting. He says, no, send me an email. He says, okay. So he sends him an email, and then the guy says, look, I got an email from that jerk. And he says, I'm hitting delete, but they're sitting right next to each other. So I feel your pain in this. It's just, in fact, I think, you all are belying the notion of the assumption that there was going to be more fragmentation as opposed when all this technology came into play. And you're demonstrating here tonight that there are many ways of connection and technology is in fact having the opposite effect. You're talking about drawing together as opposed to fragmenting.
Right. I mean, that's how we're
That's the way it's going.
Yeah, that ad that you described is like my life at MIT. I mean, we have students who go through entire meetings without looking up from their screen, and it's I think it's a personality type that often is involved in technology, and then they export that reality to all of us, and we're screwed. But on the other hand, you know, a lot of these technologies are more like what Joe is trying to do, which is to say that you augment the existing kind of community in interesting ways. And, you know, one interesting example we always bring up is getting together with friends for younger people with mobile phones is completely different than it used to be, because people never agree on where they're going to meet, or, you know, what time they're going to meet exactly. They just leave it up to the last minute and do this interactively through the phone process, which is kind of stupid on a certain level, but it works for them. And, you know, they still end up getting together. So I think it's not so much that you see huge amounts of isolation. You do, but rather that the way that people agree on when they're going to meet in public, what they do when they meet in public, what they spend their time doing when they meet in public is changing.
Yep.
And, you know, we have to be pretty careful that that changes in positive ways.
And I think that we're just in this transitional period where it's a question of like what are the social norms for a lot of this behavior, because so in my experience we've gotten to the point where in a lot of meetings there's a lot of split attention, right? So I'll be talking to you, but I'm also doing this, right? And it seems to be kind of a norm now, right? So it might not be good, but I think that, you know, it seems unlikely to me that in any time soon that we will have no reason to not get together, right? So a few years ago there was this concept of the destruction of distance, right? That telecommuting would obviate the need for living anywhere near or never going to the office, because you could do everything over the internet. And that never happened, right? I mean, there's still a lot of telecommuting, but, you know, there was a different set of social norms just kicked in, right? There are some things that you have to be physically in the room for, because people realize that you really can't, there are certain kinds of meetings that you can't do online, right? You need to be able to see somebody's face in order to be able to react, and so on. So I think that I'm not too worried, would be my response.
The other thing I would add to that is there's something about sensing other people, right? Like, I was just thinking, my buddy Mike has these little fire nights, little fire pit, and you sit around the fire and you talk, you smell the fire, you hear it crackling. Like, there's a human experience we need, and I think that's always going to prevail. And I hope that more people start doing things together that are fun, that are satisfying. And I mean, the other thing too is we're all going to need hugs always. You can't get an e-hug. I mean, you can, but they stink. So.
And once you've ferreted it out, all the people that are interested in your same arena, then it's nice to meet them.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come, yep. And then I'll get you.
My name is Bob O'Connell, and the title tonight was Networks that can help solve real government problems. Now, we've talked potholes, okay, and car theft. Is there are there any restrictions that are going to be built into this? In other words, what if we get into international type situations? Nuclear war, what's going on in Iraq and the Middle East. It's more than just answering, picking up the phone and whatever, and answering what my legislator did, how he voted, and yes, I appreciate it, but the next caller says, no, I don't appreciate it. What bothers me about the whole thing is that the abuses that can be built into it and especially people giving their opinions based on absolutely no knowledge, which I think is so prevalent in this country right now. That, we do elect people to work for us. And we assume that when they're going to vote on something, they have some knowledge. They know an awful lot more about the subject than we do. But still we're saying, yeah, we should do this and we should do that. I had a guy tell me once, oh yeah, I know that's true, I heard it on the radio. Again, I'm concerned about the abuses. Are there abuses that you're concerned about?
Well, I mean, those aren't really problems of technology. right? I
Right.
mean, those are problems of our society. You know, that the way that we value knowledge and the way that we do or don't value deliberation. So one of my criticisms of a lot of the technologies that have come out over the last couple of years is they're very focused on giving people better information, right? And that is a laudable goal in and of itself, right? So there's a page, or I can get stuff on my phone or whatever that gives me more information about certain, you know, events in life. But that's only a very small piece of the problem of existing in the world, right? I mean, a lot of what we do in terms of maintaining our culture, our country, our society, moving it forward has to do with the kind of community level communication that we have, right? The way that we resolve disputes, the way that we talk about like what those social norms should be. So I think that, I mean, so Joseph's platform and a lot of Chris's work actually as well focuses around that piece of it, the participatory, the deliberation, and I think that, so there needs to be more of that and less, you know, websites with lots of facts and figures on them. That would be my take on that.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see failure of deliberation, you can go to YouTube and look at the comments. They're just awful. I mean, they're filled with hate speech or, you know, close to hate speech, and it's a terrible way of doing it. And there's a guy who runs a organization called eDemocracy who was experimenting with how do you get people to be more civil online. And he had, you know, one great idea, which is allow people to only post once a day. And when you know that it's the only time you post, you basically think about it more. And I think of those YouTube comments, 20% of the people produce 80% of the really bad comments. And so if you limit them, you've already cut it down significantly, the damage that they can do. So there are ways that you can kind of come up with rules of procedure and rules of you know, how you interact, instantiate those, leave those, you know, up to the community to some degree to form, but make them form rules, and then you'll get much more kind of civil discourse. On the international level, you know, I think one of the biggest issues for me right now is thinking through Citizens United and the ability of corporations to form public discourse and to essentially get senators elected on the national scale or the state senate scale. That's a really big issue, and we've just seen on the traditional media side that advertising and free speech is about to change dramatically. And so I look at systems like Little Sis that I showed that basically is a way to do essentially intelligence on powerful people who are affecting their change out of the public discourse through money and through influence. And I think that there's a lot of space for that. So that I think is going to perhaps keep us from getting into the next Iraq war, you know, or war of convenience. I'm not going to say it's going to work, but it's a great avenue that we should be pursuing because, you know, right now, I think our media system is in a lot of trouble, and there's nothing to replace it yet. Clay Shirky, a very smart commentator on this, said, this is a real change, and in real change, things break before the new thing is created to fix it. And we're in that space right now. And so what you're looking at is people are a little desperate to try to figure out, you know, how do we ensure that democracy exists, you know, even when traditional media is in a real period of crisis. So on the international perspective, that's the way that I've seen it working out the most.
Callie, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. I was going to say that just on a very, very small level for you, ABC announced that on this week, their Sunday morning program with all the political lawmakers, they were going to engage PolyFact, which is an outfit which checks the factual information as espoused by those sitting in those chairs. And they're worst liars. Right. It's liar, liar, pants on fire, they'll tell you. So that's, I mean, that's a very tiny thing, but it's a beginning. You should note that David Gregory on NBC has refused to have that happen on his show. Now, as far as I'm concerned, why are you watching him? Yeah. But that's my opinion.
Cheers.
Last question.
Hi, David Reno. I have many questions about media, which would probably take another entire lecture. One question that I would have from my perspective, I was of the TV generation, which, for those of you who are under 30, once upon a time there wasn't television. And of course everyone knew television was going to turn people into brain damaged mutants who could not have an attention span of about
A nanosecond.
I'm sorry, what were you
well,
saying?
sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, yeah.
And there is in New York City a museum called the Museum of Radio and Television. It used to be called the Museum of Broadcasting. They had to change the name because cable is not broadcasting, because it doesn't go from one point to another and is intercepted, but is a closed system. Has anyone, since we are in the middle or somewhere in the process of a technological revolution with computers, has anyone today seen any wisdom of saving things like websites that may have expired so that they can then be used to, as a historical perspective, the way that scholars can today go and read the papers of William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer on microfilm to get an idea as to what the yellow journalism of a century ago was like?
So for the last no more than that, I think it's almost 10 years, the Internet Archive has been running in California. It's funded by an independently wealthy person with lots of money and time to archive the entire internet. So they save everything. So if you go there, I think it's internet.org.
I think it's archive.org.
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 And they have what they call the Wayback Machine. So you can actually look at older versions of the website going back to deep into the 90s, as I recall. So that's a fabulous resource. And they save everything. They save the text comment. They save any linked files.
So if I wanted to see what I look like with hair, I could.
Yeah.
You could
No,
go
no,
back-
he just
back
said the
to when you were
90s.
born.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh. Thanks, Chris. Thanks.
I'll give you a hug later.
Thanks, buddy.
That's an excellent question, and thank you so much.
Thank
for
you. Good to know.
it. All right. Thank you all very much. Thank you to our fabulous panelists tonight for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Please visit the info booth if you're not already a member. We'd love to have you in our club. And tonight, we offer our fantastic moderator and our speakers, Democracy in the Making, Fort Hall, and the Open Forum Movement, just as a token of our appreciation. Thanks a lot. Good night.
This preceding program was brought to you by Suffolk University. Please visit us on the web at www.suffolk.edu.